An elderly woman phoned the hospital and asked rather hesitantly, "Could I speak to someone who can give me an update on a patient's condition?" The operator inquired, "Certainly. May I have the patient's name and room number, please?" In her frail voice, the elderly lady responded, "Doreen Jacobs, room 604. The operator assured her, "Allow me a moment to put you on hold while I speak with her nurse." After a brief pause, the operator returned with an upbeat tone, saying, "I have some great news for you. Doreen is doing wonderfully. Her blood pressure is stable, her blood test results are normal, and her doctor, Dr. Ross, has scheduled her release for Tuesday." Grateful, the old lady exclaimed, "Thank you so much. I was terribly worried." The operator then inquired, "Is Doreen your daughter, ma'am?" To which the elderly lady humorously replied, "No, I'm Doreen Jacobs, and I'm in room 604. Nobody informs me about anything." A butcher, while trying to chase a dog away from his shop, discovers an unexpected surprise. The dog is holding a $1.25 bill and a note that reads, "I'd like to buy 10 pork chops, please." Amazed by this sight, the butcher takes the money, packs 10 pork chops into a bag, and hands it over to the dog. In a rush, he closes his shop. Intrigued, the butcher decides to follow the dog as it heads down the street. The dog displays astonishing behavior, waiting for the traffic light to turn green, looking both ways before crossing the road, and even checking the bus schedule at a stop. Once the bus arrives, the dog boards it with a sense of purpose. Stunned, the butcher follows suit. As the journey progresses, the dog, now inside the bus, remarkably pulls the yellow stop cable with its hind legs. The butcher watches in astonishment as the dog exits the bus. Determined to unravel this canine mystery, the butcher tails the dog closely. The dog makes its way to a house, deposits the bag of pork chops on the doorstep, and then embarks on a peculiar series of actions. It repeatedly hurls itself against the door, attempts to gain entry, and even makes a valiant effort to enter through a window. But all this results in no response from inside the house. At this point, the big guy who owns the house opens the door and proceeds to angrily scold and shout at the dog. The bewildered butcher rushes forward and exclaims, "What on earth are you doing? This dog is a genius!" The homeowner retorts, "Genius my foot! This is the second time this week that he's forgotten his keys." A father decided to take his young son out for a drink at a local bar. As they settled in, he handed his son 3 pennies to play with, hoping to keep him entertained while he enjoyed a cold beer. The little boy gleefully examined the coins and began tossing them into the air. But then, the unthinkable happened. In the midst of their casual bar outing, the boy suddenly started choking. Panic swept over the father as he realized that his son had swallowed the 3 pennies. He hurriedly snatched the boy up from the bar stool and began patting his back vigorously, desperate to dislodge the coins. Amidst the chaos, with the boy still struggling to breathe, the father cried out for help from the bar's patrons. That's when a strikingly well-dressed woman in a sharp blue pantsuit, who had been sitting quietly in a corner, engrossed in her newspaper, set it aside. She calmly put down her cup, slowly got up from her seat, and made her way towards the commotion. With unwavering confidence, she knelt down next to the distressed boy. The patrons watched in amazement as she carefully lowered the boy's pants, seized his testicles, and began to squeeze and twist them gently at first, then gradually, with more force. The boy's body convulsed, and after a few tense moments, he coughed up the last penny, which the woman adeptly caught with her free hand. A collective sigh of relief filled the bar, and the father rushed to thank the woman profusely. He was overwhelmed with gratitude for her quick thinking and life-saving actions. Still catching his breath, he asked her, "Thank you for saving my son. You're incredible, but I've never seen anyone perform such a remarkable feat before. Are you a doctor?" With a slight smile, the woman replied, "No, I work in the tax service." The other night, I had been invited for a rare night out with the guys, and I promised my wife that I would be back home by the stroke of midnight. We all know how these things go, though. Time flies when you're having fun, and the Jameson shots went down a little too smoothly. Before I knew it, it was 3:45 a.m., and I was not just a bit tipsy, I was downright plastered. Panic set in as I realized I had broken my promise, and I knew I had to get home ASAP to avoid any marital discord. So, in my inebriated state, I fumbled for my phone and called a cab. As I stumbled into the back seat, I instructed the driver to get me home as quickly as possible. The clock was ticking, and so was my unease. As the cab sped toward home, I couldn't help but worry about what would happen when I walked in the door. My thoughts raced. My wife was a stickler for punctuality, and I had broken my word. Just as I arrived at our doorstep, I heard the cuckoo clock in the hallway strike 4 times to signal that it was 4 a.m. My heart sank. I needed to think fast to avoid the impending conflict. In my somewhat inebriated brilliance, I concocted a plan. I decided to cuckoo the clock myself to make it seem like it was still midnight. In my foggy state, I cuckooed an additional 8 times, thinking it was a stroke of genius. With my mission accomplished, I tiptoed into the bedroom, trying my best to act sober. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a sense of accomplishment. I was sure I had pulled off a brilliant ruse to save face with my wife. When she asked me what time I had finally made it home, I confidently replied, "Midnight, just as I promised." She looked at me, her suspicions seemingly dispelled, but just as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, she dropped the bombshell. "By the way," she said, "we need to replace that old cuckoo clock." I was caught off guard. "Why on earth do we need a new cuckoo clock?" I asked, feigning ignorance. With a playful grin, she explained, "Well, last night I was awakened by the cuckoo clock in the hallway. It cuckooed 4 times, then it said, 'Oh shit.' It went on to cuckoo 3 more times, cleared its throat, cuckooed another 3 times, giggled, cuckooed twice more, and then it tripped over the cat and farted." A woman decides to visit her husband in prison one sunny afternoon. She's been missing him dearly and can't wait to see his face, even behind bars. As she arrives at the correctional facility, she finds herself in a rather gloomy atmosphere surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. The woman is filled with mixed emotions as she goes through the process of security checks and identification. Finally, she's allowed to see her husband. She enters the visiting room, and there he is, her beloved husband, sitting at a table, looking a bit worn, but genuinely pleased to see her. They exchange greetings, and she can't help but express her concern. "You know," as she begins, "you really shouldn't make my husband work so hard in here. He's been exhausted lately." The correction officer, a friendly and good-humored guy, chuckles at her words. "You must be mistaken, ma'am," he replies. "Your husband has it quite easy in this prison. He basically eats, sleeps, and spends most of his days in his cell, just like the other inmates." The wife, however, appears skeptical. She leans in closer and says, "I'm sorry, but that can't be right. My husband just told me he's been diligently working on something for months now." The correction officer raises an eyebrow, intrigued by her statement. "Working on something? What exactly is he working on?" The wife leans in even closer, her voice lowered to a whisper. "Well," she confides, "he told me he's been digging a tunnel." The correction officer's eyes widen in disbelief, and he can't help but let out a hearty laugh. "A tunnel? Ma'am, I assure you, there's no tunnel digging going on in this prison." The wife is now convinced that her husband is playing a prank on her. She laughs along with the officer and says, "Oh, you're right, he must be joking. My husband always had a great sense of humor. Thanks for the clarification." As the visit continues, they enjoy their time together, sharing stories and laughter. The wife leaves the prison with a smile on her face, reassured that her husband is in good hands and certainly not attempting any elaborate escape plans. Meanwhile, little does she know that her husband's clever ruse has fooled both her and the correction officer, and he's keeping his secret tunnel project under wraps.